why they won't have an election. It's because they're afraid of the voters. So alienated are the voters, so feeling disenfranchised are they with their socialist friends that the socialists are running away from an election.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What an extraordinary business statement once again from the Leader of the House. And it just simply confirms that this Queen's speech has been nothing but a charade, a simple electioneering stunt. Mr. Speaker, for us, the priority remains we need to see that extension secured, and that extension must be long enough to protect us from the cliff edge of their no-deal Brexit. And we've seen the Prime Minister's letter to the Leader of Opposition, Leader of the House, and we need to know that this Tory government cannot play any games to trick or to use an election period to engineer a way to secure their no-deal Brexit. The SNP are clear. We want this opportunity to stop this Prime Minister and to stop this toxic Tory Brexit Scotland didn't vote for. And Mr. Speaker, if there is to be an election, that election should be the chance for people to pass their verdict on the deal and for this House to reflect that, and that should come first. Tomorrow, the EU will make a decision on an extension, and we await patiently confirmation from Brussels and the terms the PM proposes. We will not be pushed today by this Prime Minister, because he might be hoping the electorate will fall for his contracts, but the SNP most certainly will not.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, isn't it not saddening that Scotland the brave used to be the call that we would get, and now it's Scotland the runaway, Scotland the let's not have an election. The SNP, who wish to challenge the government, actually want us to stay in office. I never thought that the broad coalition of the United Kingdom would have the Scottish Nationalist Party supporting a Tory government remaining in office. I look forward to that appearing on our election leaflets. But it occurs to me, Mr. Speaker, that tomorrow is St Crispin's Day, the anniversary of Agincourt. What a good day it might be for us to meet and show our independence of spirit.
Mr. Bernard Jenkins.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement? And can I just remind him that people in this House are blocking Brexit in the name of the sovereignty of Parliament. But whose is this sovereignty? What sovereignty do we hold that does not come from the British people? And shouldn't now the British people be allowed to decide who represents them in this House?
Mr. Speaker, as so often I bow to my honourable friend's constitutional expertise. It is quite clear that the sovereignty of this House did not fall upon us like a comet from heaven. It comes to us from the British people. It is the people's sovereignty delegated to Parliament. We need, as we are incapable of using it, to return it to them and ask them to have another election and decide how their sovereignty should be used.
It's absolutely fascinating, but we're not going to embark upon a philosophical discussion on the matter of sovereignty. This treats of the business of the House for Monday. Nothing more, nothing less. Brevity is required. Mr. David Hanson.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to be clear with the Leader of the House as to whether or not his motion on Monday is under the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
Yeah, good question.
Yes.
Sir William Cash.
Mr. Speaker, irrespective if people are Brexiteers, Remainers or Reversers, does my right honourable friend agree that the fundamental question which will be before the House on an early general election on Monday is about their democratic decision to be governed by themselves through their representative in Parliament?
I agree entirely, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Christine Jardine.
Much, Mr. Speaker. This House had 41 days for Maastricht, 25 for Lisbon, and now the Prime Minister expects us to rush through this legislation in fewer than a dozen days. And he expects us to do that because he has failed. He tried to prorogue Parliament in order to rush this through and get us off the cliff without a deal. He has failed. The Liberal Democrats will not support this until we can be sure that this country will not be crashed out of Brexit and the electorate has the choice.
It's always exciting, Mr. Speaker, to discover what the position of the Liberal Democrats is, because it changes like a weather vane.
Crispin Blunt.
Does my right honourable friend agree that if the President of France stands firm and declines us the extension, that there is still plenty of time next week to get the withdrawal bill passed by this House and in the other place, given the position all of the other side have taken on the unacceptability of no deal, and then the general election itself can then decide who is negotiating the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union.
Mr. Speaker, if there were a will to get the bill through, it could of course be done. Yes, my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, is absolutely right, and that it would satisfy the European Union, it would get the deal done, we would have left, and we could do it by the 31st of October, and that is what we should aim to do.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Leader of the House is familiar with the procedures of what's known as the wash-up between when an election or a dissolution is announced and when Parliament then stops. It is normally a time where, through the usual channels, bills that remain are carved up because they're not controversial. But his attempt to use that period to basically seek a carve-up in a wash-up period of the whole of the momentous future of future generations, this Brexit settlement, which, by the way, should never have got a second reading, but it did. Isn't that an abuse of the procedures of this place?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sufficiently familiar with the wash-up to understand what it actually means and what it's for. That at the end of a session, normally of a year or more, bills that have completed a lot of their passage are concluded. This session has only begun. There is no washing up to be done. The cupboards are full of clean crockery.
Mr. Beanerbone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Leader enlighten the House that if we vote for a general election on Monday, what will happen in relation to the Speaker election scheduled for the following Monday? Would it be that Mr. Speaker will be invited to stay on until the Parliament ceases?
Mr. Speaker, the rules on this are absolutely clear. That Mr. Speaker has set out the timetable for his leaving office, and we will still have tributes to him on Thursday during my statement, and people can draft away. They've got a few days in which to do it, and I expect they may be allowed a little latitude in the length of their questions on that occasion. But that, once this House has no Speaker and is sitting without the Speaker, and I am looking at the clerks for some help, the priority of this House will be to get a Speaker, whatever else is happening, and I'm getting lots of nods from very distinguished personages.
Grant Davis.
Yeah, many members on this side may allow a deal through this House holding their nose, but if and only if the public are given the final say in a people's referendum before an election. Can he undertake to say that it is and will be possible to negotiate a situation where his deal can be put to the people before we have a general election?
Leaving the European Union was put to the British people on the 23rd of June 2016, and a general election surely is consulting the people, if nothing else.
Baron.
Leader of the House confirmed that 95% of the Prime Minister's deal essentially remains unchanged from the deal that preceded it, and we had 3.5 years to scrutinise that, so this shouldn't take too long.
My honourable friend is correct, but he got rid of the undemocratic backstop, which made the deal acceptable.
Snell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Leader of the House confirm that if the House decides not to hold a general election on Monday, that he will still bring forward a programme motion at some point thereafter?
Mr. Speaker, we hope that the House will vote for a general election on Monday, because we need to clear this up. We cannot go on endlessly not making any decisions, and that seems to be the situation this House is in. It won't say yes and it won't say no, it won't say stay and it won't say go. We need to bring this to a conclusion, and the hard stop of a general election may help focus minds, because nothing else seems to.
Does my right honourable friend agree that for those who do not want Brexit, there will never be enough time to debate it, and for those who do not want a general election, there will always be an excuse to avoid it, and it would appear that those two positions are not mutually exclusive?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right. I think there may be a developing desire in some quarters in this House to suspend the Quinquennial Act.
Kevin Brennan.
This is a handy way of distracting from the reality that the Prime Minister has not succeeded in delivering Brexit by October the 31st. Those of us who have been here longer than the Leader of the House know these sorts of fun and games, this sort of jiggery-pokery that he specialises in. When he doesn't get his election, perhaps he could then consider putting the bill down with a proper timetable so we can debate it.
Mr. Speaker, we have just offered all the time that is available between now and the 6th. We could sit 24 hours around the clock. The hours that are available are equivalent to over 20 sitting days. But it is rejected, and the rejection is phony because the people who reject it don't want Brexit.
Mr. Speaker, can the Leader of the House confirm that if those members opposite wish a referendum to overturn the decision of the last referendum, then they're perfectly at liberty to stand on that basis in the general election, put it in the manifesto, and if they win that election, they can legislate for one.
Yes. My honourable friend's point is brilliant and an incisive explanation of how democracy works. And isn't it extraordinary, Mr. Speaker, that though they stand up and call for a referendum, they don't wish to put that to voters. If it were in their manifesto and if, heaven help us, they won, then they could do it. But they're so worried that they can't win and that they wouldn't win their referendum that they just try and use legislative legerdemain to try and frustrate the will of the British people.
Well, whatever the merits, I do like the word legerdemain. It's a splendid word. It's been resuscitated by the leader. Tom Brake.
If the House wants a general election on the 12th of December, can he explain to the House what the purpose of the Queen's speech was?
The purpose of the Queen's speech, the gracious speech, was to set out the legislative programme, and, Mr. Speaker, what a triumph it has been already. The Queen's speech adopted by this House with a comfortable majority, and a flagship piece of legislation already past its second reading. Who would have thought that we could have succeeded so much in so short a time? It is hard to think of a greater success politically in modern history.
Tommy Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, just for clarity, can I be sure then that it is the position of Her Majesty's Government that it will only agree to an early election if this Parliament is prepared to railroad through its terrible deal?
Yes.
And if that is the case, then it knows that will be defeated, so isn't the truth that it is the government that it is running scared of an election?
No, Mr. Speaker. Now, the logic of that point, I must confess, defeats me, and it seems it defeats most members of this House. This will be the third time the government has offered a general election. It is clearly willing to have one. It is willing to take its case to the British people. Why? Why are we willing to take our case to the British people? Because we are confident that our case is strong, our case is just, our case is right. And the reason the opposition is so afraid of an election is because their case is weak, is wobbly, and is futile.
Angus Brendan McNeill. Mr. Speaker, isn't it a fact that halfway through a parliamentary term, Parliament has got a dangerous Prime Minister in a cage, and Parliament would be wise to keep that dangerous Prime Minister in a cage, at least until we remove some of his teeth, if not all?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that reminds me of the joke about the time one should go and visit the dentist, which is, of course, at 2:30. But the honourable gentleman, thank you so much. Somebody laughed. At any rate, these sorts of jokes amuse my children. We cannot possibly want to remove the teeth of Prime Ministers unless they are rotten, but the Prime Minister has a fine set of gnashers to which to bite through these difficult problems.
Ellen Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope that honourable members will oppose this dangerous and cynical manoeuvre, not least because no deal remains a real possibility until the trapdoor is closed in the withdrawal bill, which currently allows us to crash out if no future relationship is agreed at the end of the implementation period at the end of December next year. That is dangerous.
Mr. Speaker, that tells you all you need to know. The figure of the Green Party says an election is dangerous and cynical. Dangerous and cynical to trust the people. Dangerous and cynical to go back to our voters. Dangerous and cynical to report to our employers. Mr. Speaker, that is contempt for democracy.
Philip Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the leader please confirm, for greater clarity for the House, that in his business statement just now, he referred only to a statement on Monday in relation to holding a general election. In the event that
the EU Commission come back offering a further extension, would it be reasonable for the House to assume that he will make a further business statement at the start of business on Monday to allow for debate and a programme motion on the withdrawal agreement?
Mr. Speaker, I have currently been averaging a business statement a day, and I'm not sure this is a habit that will be encouraged by you or by others unduly. However, in the normal course of events, if there were some major development in our relationship with the European Union, a statement would be made by the appropriate person, either the Secretary of State or the Prime Minister himself.
Gapes.
Now it's clear that instead of dying in a ditch, the Prime Minister has ditched the ditch. Can we ask the Leader of the House, is he aware of the problems that are going to be caused in many communities in this country by having an election as late as December the 12th, in terms of dark evenings and short hours?
Don't wish to be unkind or discourteous to the honourable gentleman in any way, but with the very greatest of respect, that is a matter to be treated of in the debate on the motion on Monday, upon which I feel confident the honourable gentleman will wish to expatiate to convey those concerns to the House. Would he mind? I actually think it's best for Monday. I genuinely do. If the leader particularly wants to respond, he can briefly, but yeah.
I thought we were getting a ditch joke, to which I was going to say ha ha.
Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Can I ask, why is the Leader of the House playing games with resolutions rather than taking up the offer from the opposition to properly programme the withdrawal bill?
Mr. Speaker, we've done both. But offering an election is not playing games, it is trusting the people. Her Majesty's government, the Conservative and Unionist Party, trusts the British people. The opposition benches do not.
Thank you. Order. I'm most grateful to the Leader for the business statement and to colleagues for their participation in the exchanges on it. We come now to the adjournment, the whip to move.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Gordon Marsden.
Thank you very much. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the second adjournment debate in 16 months I've been granted about Blackpool teaching hospitals and concerns about its governance. The first last June, when I opened up profound concerns about the processes and lack of transparency leading up to the appointment of the current chair of the Trust, Piers Butler, was, as I said at the time, the first time in my 20-year relationship as a Blackpool MP with the Trust and its predecessors, I felt it necessary to expose such levels of concern in an adjournment debate. I felt then I had no choice, given the catalogue of errors, erosion and lack of transparency which had accompanied the process, including failings within NHS improvement itself. I said then, I'm forced to conclude that the committee thought it could get away with evading proper scrutiny and transparency, that a thin veneer of irritated politeness attempting to conceal a determined effort to override public governance unless they were rubber stamped would do the trick. Well, it does not do the trick, and that's what I said last year. The Minister's predecessor on that occasion, the Right Honourable Member for North East Cambridgeshire, now the Brexit Secretary, said in his reply that the issues I'd raised were clearly cause for concern. It's clear the recruitment process for the new chair has a number of irregularities, and criticised the failings of the Trust to give decent or timely advice to MPs as stakeholders to give suggestions for people who might apply, and assured the House that, and I quote, I will be working with NHSI to ensure the irregularities regarding this appointment do not occur in future. The honourable gentleman, myself, has done the House a service in highlighting the clear irregularities in respect to this appointment. Indeed, when I met the new chair, Piers Butler, in August last year for a review and discussion of all the other hugely important issues affecting our trust, which serves not just 330,000 acute hospitals across Blackpool and the Fylde Coast, but also community health to nearly 500,000 into Wyre and North Lancashire, he hastened to assure me he had taken on board the critique and would make sure new openness and transparency on these issues would take place. And so I accepted that assurance at face value. But I little dreamt that just over 12 months later I'd have to come back to the subject and those failings, this time not with him as the passive beneficiary of a flawed process, but now as an active and probably the leading agent in another area. I want to be very clear that my concerns in no way reflect on the vast majority of hard-working staff for the Trust under challenging financial and other circumstances that affect us because of parts of our population, and especially in my constituent Blackpool South, most deprived in England, overall health in Blackpool worse than in 23 of the 32 health indicators. Their work and the many examples of good care under extreme pressure were noted in the recent CQC report, and I associate myself with those comments. All the more... Yes.
On that point, I thank my friend for giving way, and I want to congratulate him on securing yet another adjournment debate about the Blackpool Hospital Trust. It is indeed a sorry state of affairs that we find ourselves debating it once again. He's making some important points about the staff who work incredibly hard at the Trust and refers to the CQC report. And does he share my concerns that the report says that staff did not always feel respected, supported and valued, and were concerned about the culture within Blackpool Victoria Hospital?
I absolutely share those concerns, and I will come on to show how I feel that is inextricably linked with some of the shenanigans that have gone on with the confirmation of the Chief Executive. All the more reason why those staff might share the concerns and sense of grievance that I will note to and refer to. Now, into the autumn and winter period of last year and into this spring, as the Chair settled into his new Trust position, the overall continuing problems in terms of cuts, waiting times, cancelled operation, which still leave the Trust today with some of the worst mortality and waiting times across the England pattern, continued. A snap visit by the CQC in January found patients on the floor of Blackpool Victoria Hospital waiting for lack of space, triage delays of more than 3 hours, and demanding, as the Blackpool Gazette said when the report finally came out, that bosses must improve the standards of care and staffing in the emergency department. By this time, unfortunately, the Trust had a further shadow hanging over it, with the police probe into issues of alleged poisoning in the stroke unit, a situation which remains unresolved today and which I don't intend further to talk about. The then Chief Executive, Wendy Swift, had left fairly unexpectedly in April, and the Chair was at pains to tell the Gazette that her departure was in no way related to the Trust's performance. But he struck a very different tone last month when he told governors that the Trust had needed a leader with gravitas and experience who could lead a different type of engagement with our staff. That person was Kevin McGee, who was appointed as the interim temporary Chief Executive for 6 months to 31st of October. Now, when I heard of this in May, I naturally spoke to the Chairman, who assured me there would be a full and proper process for appointing a permanent Chief Exec in due course. And I said in a subsequent letter to him on the 10th of June that it would be helpful to confirm the process, when the process would begin and the period between stakeholders being advised and the closing period, and that this had been one of the issues around the process of his appointment as Chair. I heard no more until 20th of June, when the Trust Secretary sent me a note which said the post had been advertised on the 9th of June, and the shortlisting process would take place at the Remuneration Committee on the 27th. I want to emphasise that was an even more rushed deadline than the one that the Minister's predecessor had criticised for the Chairman's own appointment, and effectively blocked MP stakeholders from any ability to inform other potentially suitable applicants. I began to be concerned, but what I did not then know was that the timeline described in the note to governors on September the 16th to rubber stamp Mr McGee's appointment as the permanent Chief Exec without due process had given a rationale as follows. On the 27th of June, the Remuneration Committee reviewed the shortlist provided by Odgers, who were the recruiters, and determined the candidates presented did not demonstrate the experience or leadership skills required for the post. The non-executive directors and myself did not believe re-advertising the post would result in a stronger field of applicants, and this had been discussed with and agreed by the Regional Director of NHS Improvement after a range of discussions with experienced chief executives across the sector. How cosy. Very cosy. And I think to any impartial outside observer, it would look like a complete stitch-up by the great and good of the region. Incidentally, the only communication I'd received from the Trust between June and September the 16th was a staff bulletin from Piers Butler where he had confirmed the cancellation of interviews and said, "We will now take a few weeks to consider options." In the meantime, my article had been attention had been drawn to an article in the Health and Social Journal of the 9th of August, which was headed, "Chief Executive Makes Bid to Lead Second Trust." The journalist Lawrence Dunhill interviewed Mr McGee about creating chain models and shared leadership. Mr McGee was admirably concise about what he thought. They were a jolly good thing. He said to Mr Dunhill, "Take personalities out of it, just the ability to work together in a different way." And asked if he wanted to lead both trusts permanently, he said, "If we can look at working a different way across Lancashire, it'd be a really good thing to do, and I'd be really interested in doing that." As reported last month, it was said at the time, the former Salford Royal Chief Executive, David Dalton, had been brought in to help trusts in Lancashire to look at options for closer collaboration. Incidentally, this was the same Sir David Dalton who had been the independent assessor for the process of Pierce Butler's own appointment as chair, and which the previous minister referred to last year. So, I want to make it clear I'm not making any judgment, certainly not yet, as to whether Mr McGee will be a good, bad or indifferent chief executive. He comes with some reputation, but since he hasn't met me since his appointment in May, I cannot say more. What is very clear is that the second part of this exercise, having got Mr McGee as an interim chief executive of both Blackpool Hospital Trust as well as his existing position as chief executive of East Lancashire, that there was a clear determination on the part of the chair at least to push through his confirmation without any attempt to reopen the selection process. We know this because of the parliamentary answer I received from the minister on October the 8th, and it said, I'd asked about what capacity NHS Improvement had given advice, discussing the possibility of mergers, and it said in reply, "The chair at Blackpool Teaching Hospitals Trust and the chair at East Lancashire Hospital Trust sought the views of NHS England and NHS Improvement on the possibility of merging services and provision between the trusts." So when he'd secured the agreement of those governors at the meeting to his proposal for Mr McGee, the chairman finally decided to tell certainly myself and I think my parliamentary neighbour, the honourable member for Blackpool North and Cleveleys, of his news. This consisted of a rushed phone call to me, out I think in the countryside, just before he was about to go on holiday to Japan. I made it clear to him that I was very surprised that he seemed to have learned nothing from the failings of process and transparency in his own appointment, and was now preparing to foist a merger between two trusts, a major step, and that there should be utmost clarity and transparency about that process. When I asked him why he hadn't taken the option of doing so with Mr McGee, he said he dodged the question of having putting him on automatically on the shortlist, and said it would be a great move. When I said to him it was effectively a merger, he said it wasn't. It was an alignment, and said no decisions had been made about any merger. We know, however, from the parliamentary answer that that was incorrect. So perhaps you won't be surprised, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in the article published in the Gazette entitled "More Controversy at Blackpool Victoria Hospital," I said that the process had been at best ambiguous and at worst evasive about the merger, and that, of course, we needed to have had confirmation of what was prepared. I had no doubt the chair will continue to try to muddy the waters, but to continue the analogy, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. We also have clarity now from the second parliamentary answer that I had from the Minister that Mr McCree will receive a single salary agreed by both remunerative committees, though the Trust is still refusing to tell us what it's going to be. I said to the Gazette that this beggared belief after last year's debate, and I still believe it does.